Step into a world where vibrant neon lights meet the shadows of dark, intense storytelling. It's more than just a video, it's a complete atmospheric experience designed to pull you in. Don't just watch, feel the story. Join our community and hit subscribe today.
Afghan. The morning of my father-in-law's funeral, my sister-in-law handed me a trash bag. Not a purse, not a per-cram, a black, 30-gallon trash bag. The caterers need help with cleanup after the reception, she said, not even looking at me. You know where the kitchen is? I stood there, in the foyer of the house I had lived in for 11 years, holding a garbage bag in my black dress, while the rest of the family arranged themselves in the living room for photographs. My husband didn't say a word. He never did. My name is Claire, and I married into the Hargrove family on a Tuesday in October, 11 years ago. My husband Daniel was the youngest of 3 children. His older brother Richard ran the family's commercial real estate firm. His sister Pamela managed the family's social calendar like it was her full-time occupation, because it essentially was. And their mother Eleanor presided over all of it with the quiet authority of a woman who had never once in her life been told no. Then there was Walter. Walter Hargrove was Daniel's father. He had built the firm from a single rented office in Cincinnati to a portfolio worth somewhere north of $40 million. He was precise, deliberate, and almost entirely silent in family gatherings. A habit I came to understand was not indifference but strategy. Walter watched everything. He remembered everything. And in 11 years, he was the only member of that family who ever looked me in the eyes when he spoke to me. The first time I met him, he shook my hand and said, "Daniel tells me you're an architect." "I am," I said. "Good," he said. "This family needs someone who knows how to build things that last." I didn't understand what he meant then. I do now. The trouble with marrying into a family like the Hargroves is that the exclusion happens slowly. It doesn't arrive on your doorstep in one catastrophic moment. It seeps in through the cracks, a comment here, an arrangement there, a decision made without you that you only hear about afterward. The first Thanksgiving, Pamela seated me at the far end of the table, past the turn where the leaf had been added, separated from Daniel by 6 chairs and 2 conversations I couldn't hear. "We just thought you'd be more comfortable near the window," she said. The first Christmas, Eleanor assigned me to help the housekeeper wrap gifts while the family gathered in the den to watch old home videos. When I came in holding a tray of cookies, Richard made a joke about the help, and everyone laughed, including Daniel, who caught my eye and mouthed sorry and then looked away. The sorry was the worst part. Because it meant he saw it. He just decided it wasn't worth the fight. By year 3, I had stopped fighting too, not because I accepted it, but because I was watching. I learned that from Walter, though I didn't realize it at the time. He'd sit at the head of the table during holidays and just observe, his hands folded, saying almost nothing. Once, after a dinner where Pamela had loudly corrected me 3 times about the proper way to address clients at firm events, Walter caught my eye from across the room and gave me the smallest, most deliberate nod I had ever seen. I filed that away. The dynamic in the Hargrove house was simple, once you understood it. Richard and Pamela believed the firm was theirs by birthright. Daniel believed that keeping the peace was the same thing as being a good son. Eleanor believed that I had married into something I didn't deserve, and that my continued presence was a form of charity she had chosen to extend. What none of them understood was that Walter had a different opinion entirely. I found out the first time by accident. It was year 4 of our marriage. I had drafted a renovation plan for a small office building the firm owned in Louisville, a property they'd been trying to offload for 3 years because the layout was inefficient and no commercial tenant wanted it. I wasn't asked. I just did it because the building was sitting 2 blocks from a project I was working on, and one afternoon I walked through it and saw exactly what needed to change. I gave the drawings to Daniel. He said he'd pass them along. 6 months later, the property had been fully renovated according to my plans, leased to a tech company at 3 times the previous rate, and Richard had presented the project at the firm's annual review as his own idea. Walter called me into his study the following week. He slid a piece of paper across the desk. It was an internal memo dated 2 weeks after I'd given Daniel the drawings, with my name on it as the originating architect. I kept a copy, Walter said simply. I didn't know what to say. "You've been watching," he told me. "Keep watching. Keep watching. Don't do anything yet. Just keep watching." Then he went back to his papers, and I understood the meeting was over. Over the next 7 years, I kept watching. I watched Richard skim contractor invoices, inflating costs on 3 renovation projects and pocketing the difference. I watched Pamela redirect a charitable donation the firm had pledged, $120,000, into an account tied to her personal foundation, which had no public filings and no verifiable activity. I watched Eleanor pressure the firm's longtime accountant into restructuring Walter's personal holdings in a way that Walter had explicitly said in writing he did not want. I watched Daniel know about all of it and say nothing. And I watched Walter. Every time something happened, Walter noticed. He didn't react in the moment, that wasn't his way. But in the days following each incident, he'd find a reason to stop by whatever project I was consulting on, or he'd call me into his study under the pretense of asking my opinion on a building. And slowly, carefully, he would tell me things. He told me that he had revised his estate documents 4 times in the past decade. He told me that the firm's founding charter contained a clause that most of the family had never read. He told me that the property I had renovated in Louisville had been quietly transferred out of the main corporate entity 18 months after it was leased. He told me where it had gone. He never told me everything at once. It came in pieces, over years, like a man laying a mosaic one tile at a time, trusting that the person watching would eventually be able to see the whole image. I was patient. I had learned that from him too. Walter was diagnosed with a progressive neurological condition in the spring of the year I turned 41. He declined faster than any of us expected. By autumn, he was using a cane. By the following spring, the cane had become a walker, and the family had begun what I can only describe as circling. Richard started showing up at the house with a real estate attorney I didn't recognize. Pamela had lunch with Eleanor 3 times a week and came home with a tightness around her eyes that I had learned meant she was calculating something. Daniel began leaving the room when I entered it, which was new. Previously, his strategy had been to stay in the room and simply refuse to engage. One afternoon in August, I arrived at the house to find Eleanor in Walter's study, standing over his desk. She stepped away when she heard me in the doorway. But not before I saw what was in her hands, a manila folder with the name of the firm's founding attorney on the tab. "Claire," she said in the tone she used when she was reminding me of my place without technically saying anything I could object to. "We didn't know you were coming by." "I was invited," I said. "Walter asked me to review some drawings." She left without another word, but she took the folder with her. I sat with Walter for 2 hours that afternoon. He was tired, more tired than I'd seen him, and he spoke slowly. But before I left, he pressed a key into my hand. It was small, brass, the kind that opens a safe deposit box. "First Cincinnati Bank," he said. "Branch on Madison. Box 4471. I closed my fingers around it. "Don't go before," he said. "Before what?" I asked. He looked at me the way he had across the table at that Christmas dinner, 7 years ago. The look that said, "You know." "Before," he repeated. "Walter died on a Wednesday morning in November. Daniel called me at my office." His voice was flat in the way that meant he was holding himself together by concentrating on the logistics. The funeral was that Saturday. I arrived at the house, the family home, a Georgian-style property in Hyde Park where Walter had lived for 30 years, to find the family assembled in the foyer. Eleanor was in black, Richard stood with his wife, both of them with the careful blankness of people trying not to look pleased. Pamela was coordinating with the event staff, her clipboard in hand, directing people toward the drawing room. Daniel was standing near the window. He looked at me when I came in and then looked away. Pamela handed me the trash bag 40 seconds after I walked through the door. I took it. I set it on the kitchen counter. I straightened my dress, walked to the bathroom off the main hallway, and looked at myself in the mirror for a moment. Then I took out my phone and sent a single text message to a number I had saved 2 years ago and never used until that morning. "Today, after the reception, be at the firm's conference room by 4. The reply came in under a minute, confirmed. The funeral service itself was held at a church in Marymount, where the Hargroves had attended for 40 years. Walter had designed his own service with the same precision he applied to everything. 3 specific hymns, 2 readers, no eulogies longer than 5 minutes. The family sat in the front pew. I sat in the second row. At one point, Eleanor turned and looked at me over her shoulder. The look lasted exactly 3 seconds. I held her gaze until she turned back around. I had been waiting 11 years to do that. It felt quieter than I expected, not triumphant, just resolved. At the reception afterward, I helped in the kitchen. I refilled serving trays and directed the catering staff and accepted condolences from Walter's business associates, several of whom shook my hand with the particular warmth of people who genuinely meant it. Richard found me in the hallway near the end of the afternoon. "We'll be doing the estate review next week," he said. "Family only." "I'm family," I said pleasantly. He smiled the way he always did when he wanted to say something he decided not to say out loud. "Of course," he said, and walked away. I watched him go. "Keep watching," Walter had said. I had. For 11 years, I had. Now I was done watching. The Hargrove family arrived at the firm's main conference room on Thursday morning expecting a formality. I could see it in the way they arranged themselves, Richard at the far end near the credenza, Pamela beside him with her portfolio, Eleanor centered at the table as though she were chairing the meeting, Daniel in the chair to her left, looking at his phone. The estate attorney, James Whitfield, who had represented the Hargrove estate for over 20 years, sat at the head of the table with a leather folder in front of him. I sat across from Eleanor. She didn't acknowledge me. No one did, except Whitfield, who nodded when I came in. Whitfield began with the standard language, the overview of assets, the confirmation of the document's execution date, the attestation of witnesses. Then he began to read. To Eleanor, the family home in Hyde Park, the contents therein, and a lifetime annuity of $8,000 per month. Eleanor's posture relaxed almost imperceptibly. To Richard, 40% of the operating firm, including its commercial portfolio and existing client contracts. Richard uncapped his pen. To Pamela, the investment property in Blue Ash and a cash distribution of $200,000. Pamela wrote something in her portfolio without looking up. To Daniel, 15% of the operating firm. Daniel put his phone down for the first time. Whitfield paused, turned a page, and looked up. The remaining 45% of the firm, he said, along with the Louisville property, the Madison Avenue Holding Company, the private investment accounts designated under the 4471 filing, and the entirety of the Walter Hargrove Family Trust as constituted in the final amendment dated March of this year, to Claire. The room went very still. It was Richard who spoke first. "That's not right." Whitfield didn't look up from the document. "I'm reading the executed document, Richard. There must be another version," Eleanor said. Her voice was precise. "James, we reviewed this in September. This is not what we discussed." "What you discussed in September," I said, "was the document my mother-in-law removed from Walter's study in August." Everyone looked at me. I reached into the portfolio I had brought with me, the same portfolio I had carried into every project meeting, every site visit, every Hargrove family gathering where I had been handed a trash bag or seated past the table's turn or corrected about how to address people whose respect I had never wanted in the first place. I placed the first document on the table and slid it toward the center. "That is the filing amendment Walter executed in March," I said. "Witnessed by his physician and a notary at First Cincinnati Bank. It supersedes all prior versions." Pamela looked at it without touching it. I placed a second document on the table. "That is a full accounting of the Louisville property renovation, including the original architectural drawings I produced in year 4 of our marriage, the internal memo Walter kept documenting my authorship, and the lease agreement that followed. It establishes the basis for the asset transfer that Richard filed under his own name and which Walter subsequently corrected." Richard's jaw moved. I placed a third item on the table. It was a small digital recorder. "I'm not going to play this now," I said, "but I want you to know it exists. It contains 14 months of recorded conversations, in this building, in the family home, and in 2 outside locations, documenting the redirection of firm funds, the restructuring of Walter's personal accounts without his authorization, and a conversation between 2 people in this room about the management of Walter's medication schedule in the final 4 months of his life." The silence that followed was the loudest thing I had ever heard. Daniel was staring at me. I looked at him, really looked at him for perhaps the last time. "The medication issue," I continued, "has already been referred to the Hamilton County Prosecutor's office. I submitted the recording and supporting documentation on Monday. I was asked not to discuss specifics, so I won't, but I was told to expect contact within the week." Eleanor stood up. "This is outrageous." "James, Eleanor," Whitfield said quietly. "Please sit down." She sat. The document is valid, Whitfield said. I witnessed the final amendment myself. I have the notarized original in my office. This is Walter's last executed will, and it is unambiguous. The room stayed quiet for a long moment. Then Richard said, with the particular coldness of a man who has just recalculated and found the numbers don't work in his favor. You planned this. Walter planned this, I said. I just paid attention. I want to be honest about what happened in the weeks that followed, because I think it matters. The prosecutor's investigation moved forward. I won't say more than that, because I was asked not to, and because some things are still unresolved. What I can say is that the conversation on that recorder about Walter's medication was taken seriously by people whose job it is to take such things seriously, and that Richard and Pamela both retained criminal defense attorneys within 10 days of the estate reading. The family's challenge to the will was filed and withdrawn within 3 weeks. Whitfield had anticipated it. So had the attorney I had retained 18 months earlier, a woman named Susan Cho, who had quietly reviewed every document Walter had given me and pronounced the estate plan airtight in a way that made me feel, for the first time in 11 years, like something solid was underneath my feet. The 45% of the firm came with a board seat and operational authority. I brought in an external management firm for the transition period. I did not fire anyone who didn't deserve it. I restructured the contractor invoicing system. I made a public pledge of the charitable donation that had been redirected in full to the organization it had originally been intended for. Eleanor retained the house and her annuity. I did not contest that. Walter had wanted her to have it, and I respected his wishes, even when I found it difficult. Daniel and I separated in January. It was quiet. He signed the papers without argument, which told me everything I had needed to know for years, but had kept hoping wasn't true. On the last day we spoke as a married couple, he said, I didn't know how bad it was. I looked at him for a long moment. Yes, I said, you did. He didn't disagree. There's a building in Louisville that I renovated 11 years ago and never received credit for. It has large industrial windows on the north face that I specified because the tenant, whoever eventually leased it, would need consistent light without direct glare. The tech company that moved in told me last spring that their designers consider it the best lit workspace they've ever occupied. Walter knew I'd done it. He kept the memo. He transferred the property. I think about that sometimes, the patience of it. The decision to say nothing. To keep building quietly. To trust that what you make will still be standing when the moment finally comes. I walked through that building last month, stood in the center of the main floor, looked up at the windows, thought about the windows which drafted those plans while her husband's family was in the next room watching home videos, and didn't invite her in. I built something that lasted. Walter was right about me from the beginning. I used to think patience was something you practiced while waiting for things to get better on their own. I know now that's not what patience is at all. Real patience is active. It's deliberate. It's the choice to keep your eyes open and your hands steady while everything around you is designed to make you feel like you don't matter. For 11 years, I was handed trash bags and seated past the table's edge and corrected about things that didn't need correcting. And for 11 years, I watched. Not because I was afraid to speak, but because I understood, slowly and then completely, that the most powerful thing I could do in that house was to become the person who saw everything clearly, while everyone else assumed I saw nothing at all. Walter understood that too. He was the one who taught me, without ever making it a lesson, that integrity is not something you announce. It's something you build, quietly, in the choices no one is watching. He kept a memo I didn't ask him to keep. He transferred a property to honor work I had done without recognition. He spent years laying the foundation of something that could only be completed after he was gone, and he trusted me to be there when it was time to finish it. That kind of trust is rare. I don't take it lightly. What I've come to believe after everything is that the people in that conference room were not undone by any single decision I made. They were undone by the accumulation of every decision they had made, every shortcut, every redirection, every moment they chose, convenience over conscience. Actions have weight. They don't disappear because no one was looking. They settle somewhere and eventually the structure built on top of them becomes too heavy to hold. I'm not a perfect person. I stayed in that family longer than I should have, in a marriage that had stopped working years before I admitted it to myself. I told myself it was patience. But sometimes it was just fear. Fear of disrupting something. Even something that was already broken. That's the part of this story I think about most, not the conference room, not the documents. The 11 years of Tuesday nights where I talked myself into staying quiet one more week. If there is anything worth taking from what happened to me, it's this. The version of you that endures without becoming bitter, that observes without becoming cold, that keeps building long after anyone has stopped acknowledging the work. That version of you is not weak. That is the most formidable thing a person can be. Strength that doesn't announce itself as strength that compounds over time, and by the time anyone thinks to challenge it, it has already become immovable. Walter saw that in me before I saw it in myself. I think about him every time I walk into a room and someone assumes, based on nothing, that I don't belong there. I smile. I sit down. And I remember that I have always been exactly where I was supposed to be.